The Riverside Diner sat at the edge of a cracked parking lot, its neon signs sputtering in the February wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fryer oil, coffee gone bitter from sitting too long, and the faint sweetness of pie that never quite sold out. A radio hummed from somewhere in the back, but the clatter of plates and the bark of orders drowned it out. Ethan Murphy stood behind the sinks, sleeves rolled past his elbows, a rookie's name tag pinned crooked on his chest. Kyle. His hands moved through greasy water, stacking plates, scrubbing pans, keeping pace with the steady stream of dishes. The steam rose around him, coating his face with a damp sheen. No one paid him much attention. To the cooks, to the servers, he was just another hire, late 20s maybe, quiet, forgettable. That was the point. But Ethan was not Kyle. He was the CEO of Hearth and Home, a dining chain that sprawled across the country like a patchwork quilt of family meals. For years he had read reports, studied turnover numbers, approved training manuals. But papers and graphs told nothing about the weight of wet plates in your hands, the sting of soap in a fresh cut, or the sound of a manager's voice sharp enough to make a grown woman flinch. That sound drew his eyes to Claire. She moved through the diner with a tray balanced on one hand, her hair pulled back in a band that had lost its stretch. Her uniform was too big, the fabric wash thin. She smiled at customers with a softness that looked almost real, but never reached her eyes. The manager, a broad man with a red face, barked from the pass window. "Thompson, wrong table again." Ethan had been watching. The ticket was fine. The mistake was not hers. Still, Claire only dipped her head, whispered sorry, and carried the tray to the right booth. No argument, no protest, just silence. That silence lingered around her like armor. She kept moving even when her shoulders slumped, even when her hands trembled faintly as she poured coffee into chipped mugs. Once, as she passed the sink, Ethan saw her press a palm against her ribs, a fleeting gesture like she was holding herself together. Then she smiled again, as though exhaustion were something she had learned to hide as carefully as breath. Ethan lowered his head and kept scrubbing, but his eyes followed her in the reflection of the stainless steel. In quarterly reports she would have been nothing but a number, average server, mid-level performance, replaceable. But here, under the sickly hum of fluorescent lights, she was something else entirely. A woman carrying weight no one else saw, surviving on a smile that wasn't real. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the cold crack of guilt inside his chest. The dinner rush arrived like a storm. Boots thudding against tile, voices raised for booths, the bell above the door clanging without pause. Plates piled in the window, cooks shouting over each other, the manager pacing with his clipboard like a general in a losing battle. Ethan's hands moved faster, water splashing his apron, stacks of dishes teetering. But his attention kept slipping to the floor, to Claire weaving between tables with quiet precision. She balanced trays through the chaos, her smile fixed, her voice soft, her shoulders straight despite the barrage of commands thrown her way. Then it happened. At the pass window, one of the cooks smirked, slid a ticket from one plate to another, and called out, "Order up!" The swap was quick, deliberate, so small no one but Ethan saw it. Seconds later, a man at table 5 scowled at the wrong dish. The manager's voice cut through the clamor. "Thompson, again? How many times do I have to say? Read the ticket before you deliver." Claire froze, tray in hand, eyes flickering just briefly toward the cook who had made the switch. But she said nothing. She only took the plate back with an apology and disappeared into the kitchen, the weight of the mistake pressing solely on her shoulders. The cook laughed under his breath. Ethan felt his grip tighten on a glass until it nearly slipped from his hand. His instinct was to speak up, to correct the lie. But he didn't. Not yet. He needed to see how far this went, how much she would endure without defense. Later, when the rush slowed and the last customers trickled out, Claire slipped into the back to stack silverware. Ethan watched her from the dish pit as she quietly reached toward the basket of bread, hesitating. Her fingers brushed over the rolls until she found the smallest one, the hard, stale kind customers never touched. She wrapped it in a napkin and slid it into her pocket with a motion so practiced it was almost invisible. No one else noticed. No one cared. But Ethan saw. His chest tightened as if someone had pressed a hand hard against it. In the gleam of the fluorescent lights, he no longer saw just a tired worker taking home scraps. He saw the outline of something deeper. Hunger that followed her past the diner doors. A quiet desperation stitched into her every movement. When she walked past him, her smile flickered. Automatic, tired, but still there. As if the act of being seen with kindness was enough to keep her upright. Ethan returned it, faint but steady, though inside his thoughts churned with questions. What waited for her when she left here? Who else depended on those scraps she tucked away? The manager's voice called her name again, sharp and impatient, and she hurried off, leaving Ethan with the bitter taste of truth at the back of his throat. He had come undercover to see what employees endured. But now, watching Claire vanish into the kitchen shadows, Ethan realized this wasn't research anymore. This was personal. The shift ended long past midnight. Chairs were turned up on tables. The hum of the refrigerator the only sound left in the diner. Claire wiped down one last counter, the rag moving in slow circles, her motions steady though her body trembled faintly with fatigue. The manager barked a quick reminder about the extra shift tomorrow, and she only nodded, offering the same thin smile she had worn all day. Ethan, still in his disguise as Kyle the dishwasher, lingered in the back. He dried his hands with a towel, but his eyes followed her as she untied her apron and stepped out into the night. The lot was nearly empty, just a few rusted cars scattered beneath flickering lamps. Claire's shoes scraped against the asphalt as she walked quickly, pulling her jacket close against the cold Cleveland wind. Something tugged at Ethan stronger than curiosity. He slipped out the back door, careful to keep his distance, and followed. Claire walked for blocks, past shuttered storefronts and dark houses, her figure small beneath the halo of each passing street lamp. She didn't look around, didn't slow, just moved with the practiced pace of someone who couldn't afford hesitation. Finally, on the edge of town, she turned down a gravel drive that led to a small trailer hunched against the trees. The siding was faded, the windows fogged, but a thin stream of light glowed through the curtains. Ethan stopped in the shadows, breath visible in the cold, and watched as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. Through the thin walls came the sound of a younger girl's voice. "Claire? You're home." The door swung shut behind her, but Ethan could almost see the warmth spill out. Inside, the world changed. Claire dropped her bag by the door and pulled a stale roll, the one she had slipped from the diner, out of her pocket. She broke it in half before taking off her coat. "Look what I brought," she said lightly, her voice brighter here, almost playful. Her sister, no more than 16, sat at the kitchen table with a stack of textbooks open in front of her. She grinned, though her eyes were tired, too. "We feast," she teased, taking a piece of bread and popping it into her mouth. "Dinner of champions." Claire laughed softly, the sound weary but real. "Don't get used to it. Tomorrow I'll bring a whole basket." At the far end of the small room, an old man sat in a recliner, his hands folded in his lap. His eyes, clouded but gentle, lifted when Claire spoke. "That you, darling?" "Yes, Grandpa," she said, kneeling beside him. She took his hand, her fingers brushing over the rough skin. "How was today?" He frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Your mother said she was coming. Did she?" Claire's smile didn't falter, though her throat tightened. "Not today. Maybe tomorrow." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and Claire kissed his hand before rising. She moved easily between roles, server, sister, caretaker, like someone who had learned to live on fragments of herself. At the table, her sister groaned at the math problems spread before her. "I'll never get this. I'm doomed." "You're not doomed," Claire said, pulling up a chair. She broke off the last bit of bread and handed it over. "Fuel for the brain. Now show me where you're stuck." For the next hour she leaned over the workbook, her voice patient, steady, even as her eyes grew heavier. She coaxed her sister through each problem, laughing when she finally solved one. The girl beamed, leaning against her. "You should be the one in school, Claire." Not me. Claire brushed a strand of hair from her sister's forehead. You're going to college. Both of us can't afford to dream right now, so you're going to do it for both of us. Her sister's eyes shimmered, but she didn't argue. Later, after the lights dimmed and her grandfather drifted into sleep, Claire washed the few dishes in the sink, humming softly so her sister wouldn't hear how tired she was. She touched the edge of the counter to steady herself once, her knees trembling, but then straightened and continued. From the darkness outside, Ethan stood frozen. He had followed to satisfy a suspicion, but what he found pressed against his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. The quiet dignity with which she carried her world, the way she turned scraps into dinner and exhaustion into comfort. It was more than survival. It was love, stubborn and unyielding. He had spent years building a business meant to look like family. But this was family. Fragile, imperfect, hidden in a trailer at the edge of town. And without her, it would fall apart. Ethan turned away finally, the crunch of gravel under his shoes loud in the silence. He didn't know what he would do yet, only that he couldn't unsee what he had seen. The Riverside Diner was packed when the storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows, neon lights flickered, and thunder rumbled over Cleveland like a warning. Inside, the noise of clattering dishes and shouted orders drowned out the storm, until the power snapped off all at once. Darkness swallowed the room. Customers gasped. A child cried. The hum of the refrigerators ceased, leaving only the rain's furious drumming on the roof. For a heartbeat, the diner was nothing but shadows and silence. Then the manager barked. Candles! Get candles! A busboy scrambled with a box from storage, placing stubby wax candles in glass jars along the counters. Their small flames flickered, painting the room in gold and black. Customers muttered nervously, some pulling out their phones for light. The cooks cursed in the kitchen, unable to work without power. But Claire didn't stop. At the dish pit, where even the candlelight barely reached, she kept scrubbing plates in lukewarm water. Her hands moved steadily, as though momentum alone could keep her from collapsing. Her face glowed faintly in the candlelight, damp strands of hair clinging to her temple. Ethan had been drying silverware beside her, pretending it routine, though his eyes never left her. He saw her body tilt once, her knees almost buckling, before she steadied herself on the counter. He opened his mouth to speak, then heard the sound, a sharp crack of glass. Claire gasped. One of the plates had shattered under her grip, and a shard sliced across her palm. Blood welled instantly, bright against the dim glow of the candles. She tried to keep hold of the dishcloth, pressing it to the cut, but her breath hitched in pain. Don't, Ethan said quickly, stepping forward. She tried to wave him off. It's nothing. Just, her voice caught. She winced and pressed harder. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded handkerchief, white linen, impossibly out of place in a dishwasher's uniform. Without hesitation, he wrapped it around her hand, tightening the knot firmly but gently. His fingers lingered against her skin, steadying her trembling ones. Her eyes flickered to him, confusion crossing her face at the unexpected softness in his gesture. She tried to smile, but it came out faint, crooked. This isn't the worst thing that's happened to me, she murmured, half a laugh, half a confession. Ethan froze at the words. They weren't dramatic, just flat, honest, spoken like someone who had grown used to pain. The candlelight flickered across her face, and for the first time he saw not just exhaustion, but a quiet acceptance of suffering that cut deeper than the wound in her hand. He tightened the knot, just enough to stop the bleeding, and said softly, "You don't have to do everything alone." Her eyes lingered on his for a moment, searching, as though she wanted to believe him but couldn't afford to. Then she pulled her hand back gently, flexing her fingers around the cloth. "If I stop, everything falls behind." "Then let it," he said. But she was already turning back to the sink, cradling her hand against her chest, reaching for another plate with the other. The water was tinted faintly pink now, though she tried to hide it. Ethan stood frozen, watching the stubborn tilt of her shoulders, the way she refused to show weakness even in pain. Around them, the diner buzzed with candlelight conversations and impatient customers waiting for the storm to pass. But at the dish pit, the world had narrowed to two people and the soft band of cloth binding her hand. The storm outside raged louder, rain hammering the roof, the wind rattling the windows. Inside, Ethan realized something he had been trying to ignore since the night he followed her home. Claire wasn't just another employee enduring unfair treatment. She was the hinge on which an entire fragile world turned. And she was breaking. The days blurred together inside the diner. Storm or no storm, blackout or candlelight, the routine never stopped. Orders still piled up, coffee still burned in glass pots, and the manager's voice still cut through the air like a whip. Claire was there for every shift. First in, last out. She moved like a ghost of herself, smiling faintly, carrying trays with one hand while the other, still bandaged with Ethan's handkerchief, trembled against the weight. No one asked why she was always the one covering doubles. No one questioned why she never said no. She simply kept going, until even Ethan, playing the role of Kyle the dishwasher, could barely keep his anger in check. By the third double shift in a row, he noticed the change. Her steps dragged slightly, her smile barely flickered. Her eyes dulled as if the light inside her had dimmed too far. Yet she kept pushing, refilling cups, apologizing for delays, bending under the burden no one else wanted to carry. The dinner rush that night was relentless. Families crammed into booths, kids screaming over fries, cooks shouting orders, the air thick with grease and heat. Claire carried a tray with 4 plates, her arms trembling under the weight. Ethan caught her eyes just once from the dish pit, saw the pale cast of her face, the way her lips pressed tight as though she was holding herself together by sheer will. She reached the table. One step, then another, and then her knees buckled. The tray clattered to the floor, dishes shattering, voices gasping. Claire collapsed with them, her body folding onto the tiles, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. The diner froze for a moment, silence heavy in the air. The manager muttered a curse under his breath and barked, "Somebody get her up! We're short-staffed already." But Ethan was already there. He dropped the rag, pushed through the startled crowd, and knelt beside her. Her pulse fluttered weakly under his fingers, her skin clammy and pale. He lifted her gently, ignoring the stares of customers, and carried her toward the back room. On the narrow bench beside the lockers, he laid her down. Her eyes fluttered open after a long moment, unfocused, breath shallow. Ethan whispered, "Don't move. You've been pushing too hard." She blinked, trying to orient herself. And then, in a hoarse voice, the first words she spoke were not "What happened?" or "Am I okay?" but "Do I still get to keep my job?" Ethan froze. The words struck harder than any reprimand, harder than the storm, harder than the silence of her weary smiles. She wasn't afraid of fainting. She wasn't afraid of pain. She was afraid of losing the only paycheck keeping her fragile world alive. He leaned closer, his voice steady but breaking inside. "Claire, you nearly collapsed for good. This isn't worth your life." Her lips trembled. She looked at him with something close to shame, something deeper than exhaustion. "If I don't work, they don't eat. My sister, my grandfather." She tried to lift her hand, but it fell weakly back onto her chest. "So I keep going." Ethan wanted to say more, to tell her she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to keep breaking herself in silence. But the manager's voice cut in from the doorway, impatient and cold. "Break's over. If she can stand, she can work. If not," he gestured sharply toward the door, "there are others who need ours." Something in Ethan snapped, but he held it back, just barely. "Not yet. Not here." He stayed by her side, his hand steadying hers, as her breathing slowed into something more even. Her eyes closed again, lashes damp against her cheeks. Ethan stayed there long after the manager stalked away, long after the noise of the diner faded. And in that silence, he knew. Claire Thompson wasn't just another employee enduring the grind. She was the one holding together a fragile world, thread by thread. And if she broke, that world would unravel. The staff meeting was called at dawn, The diner still locked, windows fogged from last night's rain. The workers gathered in hoodies and coats, leaning on counters, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Claire stood near the back, hands folded, a faint bandage still visible under her sleeve. Ethan came in last, not as Kyle the dishwasher but as himself. He carried a small projector, set it on the counter and turned it on. A square of light bloomed against the wall above the pie case. The manager frowned. "What the hell is this? We've got prep too." The footage cut him off. From the overhead camera, everyone saw the cook slide one ticket to another plate, grinning. Claire carried it out. The mistake, the yelling, the finger jabbed in her face. Then another clip. The schedule, her name stacked with double shifts in red. Then the doorway. Claire, tired, agreeing to more hours she hadn't chosen. The room was silent except for the projector's hum. The manager scoffed. "Glitches. People make mistakes." Ethan shut the projector off. The light faded, leaving only dim fluorescence. He took off the cap, set it down and unpinned his name tag. His voice was calm. "My name is Ethan Murphy, CEO of Hearth and Home." A ripple went through the staff. Some stared, some laughed nervously, some just blinked. The manager's smile faltered. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're going to believe her? She's lazy." "No," Ethan said. "I'm going to believe what I saw." He turned to him, steady. "You're done here. Effective today." The clipboard slammed onto the counter, but no one backed the manager. Not the cook, not the servers. He left, the doorbell jingling sharp in the silence. Ethan let out a breath. This diner will change. Breaks will be honored. Schedules will be fair. And anyone with concerns will have a voice, starting now. The staff shifted, uncertain, glancing at one another. And then Claire, who had been quiet as always, stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, but she didn't stop. "Silence isn't permission," she said. "You can't keep people in fear just because they need a paycheck." Her words landed heavy, real. She looked at the cook who had swapped tickets, at the busboy who had worked every weekend without rest, at the hostess who twisted napkins to hide her nerves. "We don't fight back because fighting costs money," Claire continued softly. "So we nod. We stay late. We take the blame. But that doesn't mean we agreed to be treated like we don't matter." She touched the bandage on her hand, almost unconsciously. "We matter." The room was still. Then a long breath escaped from someone in back. The hostess lowered her ruined napkin. The cook lifted his eyes. For the first time, no one looked away from Claire. It wasn't a speech. It was a wound spoken aloud. And somehow it made the whole room lighter. Outside, dawn pushed pale light into the diner windows. The neon sign buzzed back to life. Inside, the staff finally moved, not with the old hurried fear, but with something else. Space to breathe. Ethan stayed near the counter watching Claire. She wasn't smiling for cover anymore. Just standing, shoulders square, her words still hanging in the air like a promise. The diner never felt the same after that morning. The air was lighter, as if the old walls themselves had unclenched. Schedules were posted in the open, breaks were real, and no one whispered in fear when the phone rang with shift changes. For the first time, people laughed at work without lowering their voices. But Claire moved carefully through those weeks, as though waiting for the ground to crack again. She still smiled softly at customers, still wiped counters with quiet diligence. She accepted gratitude from co-workers with a nod, but inside she held herself apart, as if she couldn't quite trust the new world that had unfolded around her. Ethan didn't push. He lingered in the background, not as Kyle anymore, but as himself. He visited the diner often, not to supervise but to sit at a corner booth with a notebook, sometimes sharing a coffee with staff, sometimes just listening. And always his eyes followed Claire. Not to watch her work, but to see the weight she carried, to remind himself why he had come. It was 2 weeks later when he finally asked her to step outside. They stood near the back door, the night cool, the hum of the highway in the distance. Claire folded her arms against the wind, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "I have an offer for you," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but his heart raced like he was pitching an idea to the world's hardest board. We're creating something new, an employee advocacy program across all our diners, schedules, conditions, protections. We need someone to lead it, someone who's lived it. Claire stared at him as though the words were in another language. Me? Yes, you. She laughed, but it was short, almost bitter. I wash dishes. I pour coffee. You want me to stand in boardrooms and… She shook her head. No, that's not me. Ethan held her gaze. You've already led. The way you spoke in that meeting, people listened. They believed you, because you're real. Her arms tightened around herself. For a long time she didn't speak. Then quietly, if I say yes, it won't be me anymore. It'll be something else, and I'll lose what little I've built. My family needs me working, not… That's part of the offer. Ethan interrupted gently. A scholarship for your sister. Support for your grandfather's care. You won't lose them. You'll have more time for them. Her breath caught, but then she shook her head firmly. No, help isn't free. There's always a string. I've survived because I never owed anyone. I can't. She turned away, her face hidden in shadow. Ethan wanted to reach for her, but didn't. He only said, softly, think about it. That night, Claire sat at the tiny kitchen table in the trailer, the scholarship packet unopened before her. Her sister, Emma, read every line, eyes wide. Full tuition, books, housing. Claire, this is real. Claire rubbed her forehead. It's too much. We'll end up owing them forever. I can't take that risk. Emma's hands trembled as she pushed the papers across the table. It's not a risk. It's a chance. Don't you see? You've carried us this far. You've worked until you broke. But this is the first time someone's seen you, not just what you can endure. Claire looked at her sister's shining eyes, at the hope she had fought so long to protect. Her chest ached. Emma's voice cracked, a tear sliding down her cheek. Please don't throw it away for us. You've earned this. You deserve more than scraps. The words broke something inside her. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling silently, her shoulders shaking. For once, she didn't hide them. Emma reached across, and they held each other in the dim kitchen light, the papers between them like a fragile bridge. 6 months later, the air smelled of polished wood and ink. The stage lights burned warm against Claire's skin as she stood at a lectern in a college auditorium, looking out over rows of students, workers, families. Her voice carried steady across the room. I was just a dishwasher, she began, hiding pain behind a smile. Every night I came home with scraps of bread and an empty body, but I pretended it was enough, because I thought if I stayed silent, I was safe. But silence isn't safety. It's permission. Her eyes swept the crowd. She saw her sister in the front row, notebook in hand, beaming through tears. She saw her grandfather, dressed in his best shirt, clapping absently, his confusion softened by pride. And beside them, she saw Ethan. No disguise, no distance, watching her with quiet, unshakable belief. Claire smiled then, not the practiced smile of survival, but something new, unguarded and real. And one day, she said, voice thick with emotion, someone truly saw me, and that changed everything. The applause rose like a tide, filling the hall, carrying her voice into something larger than herself. For the first time, Claire didn't feel small. For the first time, the world felt wide enough for her to step into.